Really pleased to be introducing Christopher Kutz. Christopher is a professor of law at Bolt Hall, which is UC Berkeley's law school. He's also taught previously at Columbia and Stanford and Sciences Po in Paris, France. He works on a number of topics. I think your first book was called Complicity, right? Which was about how we are responsible individually for the actions that we do collectively. And his latest book, now Democracy and
On War and Democracy.
On War and Democracy, thank you. It's on exactly what it sounds like, the intersection of democratic values and the ethics and law of war. He's also published on a number of other topics, including climate change and torture. And today I'm thrilled that he's agreed to come speak to us on drones, killer robots, and democratic wars. So please join me in welcoming Christopher Kutz.
Thank you very much. I should say also, I teach in a program called Jurisprudence and Social Policy, which is a doctoral program at Berkeley, which is aimed at students like perhaps many of you. So it's aimed at students who are interested in law and ethics and political theory, sociology, aimed at students who are trying to understand the way in which norms and laws shape and constrain the way politics and society develop. And if that's something you're interested in, please, Josh will pass out send around my contact information. I'd love to speak to you about your future as a PhD student in the program. It's a great pleasure to be here. I haven't been to Sonoma State before. You are just in one of the most beautiful places on earth, and it's wonderful to see so many faces here. I'm here to talk with you. I think the title I advertised was just Killer Robots and Democratic Wars. I decided to add drones to the mix because I think a lot of the issues about killer robots, lethal autonomous weapons systems, are raised initially in a discussion of drones. Drones are now a little bit more normalized in our political discourse. We're more used to them. And so I thought I'd talk to you a bit about drones and some of the political, philosophical issues that drone-based warfare raises on the way to talking about killer robots. There are a lot of things we could say about both drones and robots that aren't really philosophical. I'm going to try to address some, what I'm calling roughly philosophical questions, sort of bigger, normative, big picture questions. They're not really technical questions, and they're not really sort of international relations questions about geostrategy and international stability, although those may in fact be the most important questions that we need to worry about. Talk a little bit about those matters, but by and large, this is a talk about some of the philosophical issues that arise from particularly the American increasing reliance on drone-based warfare and on an American program of development of killer robots. Let's get started. Oh, whoops, that's right. I don't have it connected here. Okay, so that's a drone. We all know what a drone looks like. It's a system remotely piloted from Nevada, upstate New York, somewhere else. Multiple sensors on board. They'll hover over their targets for a very long time. Usually, in many cases, the targets are identified as a part of the counterterrorism process. They're identified through intelligence. The drone pilots will hover with the cameras until the target, usually a male identified as a combatant, separates himself sufficiently from family and from people who are not targets. A missile is fired, and somebody is killed. We'll come back to drones in a minute, just to see the images. Here's one kind of killer robot that's already deployed. This is a Samsung SGR-1 deployed on the South Korean border, and what you're seeing is a demonstration. Actually, they are immobile. They're I guess potted in giant rocks, but they are armed, and they can identify somebody who is approaching with arms, presumably a North Korean soldier, and they can identify somebody who is making a surrender gesture, or they're supposed to be able to identify somebody making a surrender gesture, and not to shoot that person. The idea is that they are porous to people defecting from North Korea, but will shoot to kill people not in a surrender position. What are some questions we want to ask about drones, killer robots, and democracy? Well, the question I'm interested in is the question of responsibility. Responsibility has a negative meaning as well as a positive meaning, or a backward sense as well as a forward sense. Negative responsibility, backward responsibility, is about responsibility for things we have done. What are the liabilities associated? How bad should you feel? Should you pay reparations? Should there be punishment, and so on? Those questions are very important. They're raised. Typically, I believe the image that we have down there is of a. I'm trying to remember where I got the picture. It's, I believe, a drone strike that killed quite a number of Pakistani villagers who were not supposed to be killed, who were not targets. And there are questions of reparations and liability there. But the kind of responsibility I'm especially interested in is positive responsibility, responsibility looking forward, the responsibility that you have for your friends, your pets, your children, your parents. How you should be thinking in advance of how to take care of them, how to include the value of their lives in your thinking. Question we could ask is, what is the responsibility of citizens? We have a process, a very distinctive process, formed around drone killing, in which decisions about targeting and the use of lethal force are made by a small number of people, typically a small number of men, in a room. This picture actually, it's not of a drone killing, it's a picture of the bin Laden raid, which used a killing team, a SEAL team, as you know, as the form of lethal force. But the picture is emblematic of the way that drone operations are carried on, where decisions are not distributed through a large military organization. They're made by a very small number of people and implemented through a chain of command that usually only affects a very small number of people. Or the decision itself is only affected by a very small number of people, drone operators and their supervisors, some legal officers to supervise that process as well, until, boom, many more people are affected. Question is, what's the connection between us all and that hole in the ground? How should we be thinking about our responsibility negatively? How should we think about our responsibility positively? What controls should a democratic state try to place on the people whom it is charged with the specific task responsibility of engaging in that killing? I'm going to argue for a couple of different claims here. One is that we bear responsibility for defense actions as citizens in a democratic state. The killings are done in our name. They are done to keep us safe, to protect American interests. We are responsible for things done in our name by people whom we have hired and charged with that responsibility, responsible in a negative sense, and responsible in a positive sense, to give them instructions that conform to our will, conform to our values, conform to our principles. I don't think that's so controversial. We bear such responsibility even when drones and robots are involved. That shouldn't seem controversial if we're responsible when SEAL Team 6 goes in and kills Osama bin Laden. Responsible perhaps in the sense of taking collective pride. Perhaps responsible in the sense of being worried about the collateral deaths in that raid, but responsible nonetheless when a human is pointing the gun and pulling the trigger. And we should be responsible when drones and robots are involved. Talk about why, even though as a philosophical matter, principled matter, that claim shouldn't be controversial, it nonetheless seems controversial. As a version of this is the more specific part of the claim, drones and robots present special concerns about responsibility. In particular, they make it easy for citizens to be especially complacent about the deaths that occur, because those deaths don't involve a human pointing a gun, pulling a trigger, dropping a bomb payload directly. Stuck here. Okay. One thing sometimes people wonder is there a puzzle about state responsibility, about the idea of state responsibility, collective responsibility? People talk a lot about collective responsibility as being a bad thing, as being an illusion. One idea is that many, particularly sort of scenes of long-standing ethnic conflict, think of the Balkans, think of conflict in sub-Saharan Africa, that these conflicts are the result of bad claims about collective responsibility. Well, you're a member of this ethnic group, and your ethnic group 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 600 years ago did something to members of my ethnic group, therefore you're responsible, you're tainted with that legacy of sin, and I will kill you. I will destroy you, I will try to wipe out your group. Collective responsibility, in that sense, seems to generate a lot of killing, a lot of wickedness, a lot of problems in the world. Nonetheless, I think we talk very easily about state responsibility. Talk about it most easily in positive context. Yay, the USA won 426 swimming medals in the last Olympics. Go USA, we won! Collective responsibility on the positive side is pretty easy to appreciate. It's not an illusion. We feel, we connect, we understand ourselves in relation to a collective as members of a collective, particularly in positiveness. Maybe you don't feel that at the national level, maybe you feel it at a regional level, maybe you feel a certain kind of unity as California. And certainly one thing the Trump administration has brought about is not just a sense of a kind of discovered unity among progressives, resistors across the country, but particularly in California, I think the West Coast, a sense of having a distinctive regional and political identity that matters to people, that explains how they feel and how they react and the kind of actions they're prepared to take in resistance to an onslaught against those values. Collective responsibility, understood in political terms, is a real and moving part of our lives. People who have said, look, there are people who say, these are sort of straw men people, but they're out there, who say there is no such thing as state responsibility. There are only individuals making individual choices and individuals who ought to be held responsible. I think they misunderstand how we as citizens live our lives, how we think of ourselves both positively and negatively in relation to acts of a collective. I won't go into this now, but I don't think there's any special puzzle about state responsibility, even though the decisions are made by specific individuals to, in a sense, kill specific individuals. We citizens stand behind, we understand them as acting in our name, as acting as our agents. There's no special puzzle there. That's how we do it. We don't do it by pulling triggers, we do it by voting. And we do it by acquiescing in the results of votes that we lose. Being a good loser is as important a part of democracy as being a good winner. And that creates the basis for citizen responsibility. Okay, let's switch to drones. There's some good things about drones. There's some reasons to like drones. Drones have not eliminated the problem of unwanted civilian deaths in war, but they've greatly minimized it. Drones are, if you are committed to a value of the values of the law of armed conflict, the values of the ethics of war, drones are just a fantastic invention. The two central values in the ethics of war are the values of discrimination, of targeting only combatants, and the value essentially of proportionality, of minimizing harm done to non-targeted non-targets, to civilians, civilian property, and the like. Drones are tremendously accurate, much more accurate than the military alternatives of bombing, which tends to kill a lot more people, destroy a lot more property, or military raids. Military raids may not destroy as much property, but a lot of people get killed, a lot of innocent bystanders get killed. Drones are, from an ethical point of view, relative to the ethics of war, understood narrowly, highly effective and highly valuable. They can reduce national security threats where no other action is possible. The idea is that there may be political reasons why sending in larger numbers of troops or a larger military footprint is infeasible or would create much higher levels of global instability, distrust. Drones can protect national security at a relatively low cost of life, of enemy life, at an extremely low cost of home life, of the life of the military operators using those weapons. And they can therefore protect national security interests at a low cost. That's another reason to like drones. They can substitute for more disruptive force. It's more or less the same point. Maybe there's some bad reasons to be worried about drones as well. You know how bad these are. One thing that is often said about drones, maybe said a little less now than it was 2 or 3 years ago, is that drone killing is video game killing. And it induces a kind of moral degradation, particularly the operators who are engaged in this killing. The idea is that people who are killing remotely by video screen are becoming less than human in the way they kill, because they treat they treat the deaths, they dehumanize the objects of their killing. That's, I mean, a general truth about soldiers of war, but they dehumanize them in a way by relating them to mobile video game targets. I say that's a bad reason because actually the evidence seems to point the opposite way, and some of this evidence is put out by the military in an attempt to defend the drone-based operations, but there are reports at quite high levels of post-traumatic stress disorder among drone operators, and certainly in interviews. I have a student working on this right now. Interviews with drone operators. They have extraordinary intimacy with the lives of their targets in many cases, particularly in these counterterrorism cases. I talked about the drones hovering. So a drone operator will be engaged in watching the target, pick up his children and drop them off, living a home life. And sort of the humanity, what the drone operators say is the humanity of the target is brought home to them in a way that it isn't in more conventional combat. So I'm not sure that concern is a real concern about drones. Sometimes people say killing at a distance is worse than killing up close. This is something people have said since, the Battle of Hastings. They mentioned the longbow, the development of the longbow, that there's a kind of nobility to essentially hand-to-hand combat, and that nobility, which is a redeeming value in war, is lost as there's separation. Bad reason to be worried about drones. There is something chilling about, particularly sort of the image, the cinematic image people have of the drone operator, getting into his minivan in his Nevada suburb and driving into work, and then killing a few people in Pakistan, driving home at the end of the day. There's something chilling about that. And we can talk later about what's chilling about it, but is the fact that the killing is done at a distance really the chilling feature. A lot of killing at war is done at relative distance. Particularly in traditional military operations, artillery is lobbed from significant distances. In more modern times, air support often involves very remote, high altitude bomb flights. Bombing distances and the like. Distance doesn't seem to be an especially distinctive feature about drones, and it's unclear why it's so bad. I'm calling it a bad reason, but again, we can talk about that more later. There's some good non-philosophical reasons to worry about drones. Drone technology reduces the cost of international violence, hence increases the supply. I said that drones are a great thing because they reduce the deaths of non-combatants, and they do relative to a conventional military operation. On the other hand, if you think that the risk to non-combatants is a reason not to engage in a military operation, the drone reduces that risk, then you're going to engage in a military operation with drones that you might not have engaged in at all. Since this is the flip side of the point that I said that drones can be used where nothing else can be, maybe we use them too much. We might increase the total supply of violence, where in the absence of reliance on drone-based killing, we try something else, diplomacy perhaps, or various forms of lower-level police-type intervention, particularly in counterterrorism strategy. That's a reason to worry about drones, that they've increased the reliance, particularly of the U.S., on violence, on lethal force, when there are other alternatives possible. Drone surveillance destroys civil society in the targeted state. This is a point that was made. There was a wonderful study by some law student clinics of drone killings, law students at Stanford and Columbia, looking at the effects in Waziristan, Pakistan, of drones. And it wasn't so much the killings, although the killings are significant, as the surveillance, the buzzing, the sight of the drones always in the sky. It chills civil society, especially society in which politics is done. It's not democratic, but it's done through forms of meetings, typically meetings of men. If an assembly of men is deemed a potential assembly of combatants and is at risk, well, men stop meeting, politics ends, civil society is degraded. And more generally, the idea of surveillance accompanied by the risk of lethal force is something that tends to keep people cowering at home, living in fear, living in the shadows, as opposed to engaging in the kinds of interpersonal relationships, meetings, transactions that make a society a place where one feels included, where one feels that one has a place, where one feels that one has a future. That's, I think, a very, very serious concern about drones. Drones undermine the stabilizing force of the sovereignty system, encourage national hypocrisy. This is another very serious concern about drones, particularly in international diplomacy. By this is a shorthand for saying the way things usually work, or the way they worked under the Obama administration, we'll see under the Trump administration, is that there is a level of secret coordination among governments, the United States and Yemen, the United States and Pakistan, in which the government of the target, Pakistani government or the Yemen government, says, okay, you can use drones here, but use them in this region, but not that region. Use them up to this level, but not at that level. But we will, just know, publicly denounce every use of drones that you engage in, because otherwise we'll have our citizens up in arms around us. And so what the drone system has encouraged is a system of routine, apparent violation of national sovereignty, even though there's secret consent by the state, not necessarily by its people. These are non-democratic states as well. But a system of secret consent undermining what has been actually a fairly effective, reasonably effective system of international stability, which is respect for other sovereign territories, not using military force without UN authorization or some form of overt consent. So that's a pretty serious concern about drone use, undermining the international system. Finally, drone use may proliferate. Drones started off really province of United States, Israel, France is catching up a bit, England is catching up a bit. Drones are cheap and easy to use. Probably have seen the reports of ISIS using both armed and non-armed drones extensively on the battlefield as well. These are not long-distance systems, but they're battlefield systems. Drone use is catching up to the extent that drone use is normalized by the practice of great powers, particularly the United States. There is really no there comes to be no diplomatic solution to their use by other state actors, and there's little sort of popular resistance to their use by non-state actors. So those are some reasons to worry about the heavy reliance on drones, non-philosophical reasons. What are some philosophical reasons? Well, one, I don't know if this is a bad reason or a good reason. I can't decide what to think. This is the idea that riskless warfare is wrong because a warrior's honor requires exposure to risk. This is not the same point as the worry about distance killing, although it could be a component of that. There's distance-based killing that nonetheless is risky, distance-based killing that occurs in the same battle space. But the idea is that we have two standards of permission for the use of lethal force. One is our standard at home in domestic circumstances, where lethal force is very tightly controlled by the state. The state claims a monopoly on lethal force, except when the state is not in a position to intervene. This is the law, the ethics of individual self-defense. Only the state can use lethal force, and ideally, this is obviously an ideal that is routinely violated, particularly in communities of color in the United States, but the state should only use lethal force in order to protect against deadly threats. And citizens are scrutinized very heavily for when they use deadly force. War is not like that. There's talk about national self-defense and the use of war, but as we know, history of war is one in which many broad excuses, righting wrongs, righting violations of international law, protecting national interests are used and accepted for use by democratic and non-democratic citizens alike as a basis for killing lots of other people. We have very permissive rules for the use of force in military contexts. Now, some people have argued that a condition of accepting a broad permission of the use of force, the use of war to settle political conflict, resource conflict, and the like, condition is that both sides have skin in the game. Something like a fair game model, something like a fair fight. Maybe not a fair fight, you don't want to fight fair, you want to win, but a game in which there's risk on both sides. If you think that part of the reason why we accept war, non-direct self-defensive force, lethal force, as a way to resolve political and other conflicts, is that both sides are at risk in this, so it's not just a case of bullying, but both sides are at risk, then riskless warfare looks like it's undermining the foundation for a more permissive set of norms around lethal force. Now that involves defending the claim that exposing one's own soldiers to risk is a valuable thing, that it's not simply better to minimize the risks to your own soldiers, And those are difficult questions, but I think they're interesting questions that are worth talking about. Second, I think, more or less philosophical claim in political theory is that drones, at least as presently said, this goes a little bit against the proliferation point I just made, but as they presently exist, really as the long-distance lethal force of drones is a property of great powers, is that it's creating qualitative new forms of international inequality, interstate inequality. It allows a kind of domination because, precisely in a sense, because the U.S. can use lethal force across borders without apparent consent and at very low domestic political risk. It means that great powers not only can essentially bully through economic power, but can bully through the direct use of military power, not simply saber rattling, not simply sort of empty threats that are unlikely to be achieved. It makes more effective systems of international domination and hierarchy. And that matters in terms of actual consequences. If you think that international inequality, interstate inequality is a bad thing, it also matters philosophically, conceptually, if you think that one of the virtues, if there are virtues, of a system of international sovereignty is that it pretends to a kind of global equality, it aspires to a kind of global inequality in which the legal prohibition of war except in self-defense serves as its main value. In creating a system of equal states, large and small, where your status isn't supposed to depend on the force of your military, well, having this new military outlet could say exposes the hypocrisy of the whole system, or you could say it undermines that aspiration towards a kind of international equality as well. Another thing, another point about drones, I'm not sure if this is philosophical or not, I'm not sure the label matters. Many people think that targeted killing is assassination, and that's wrong. In fact, the US used to think that targeted killing, the identification of specific targets against whom to use lethal force was wrong. The military, you're all much too young to remember, maybe not all of you, but the Reagan administration, when it tried to kill Muammar Gaddafi after his sponsorship of terrorist bombing in a Berlin discotheque, essentially tried to pretend that it hadn't targeted him at all, because this was seen as, not because it was seen as a form of political assassination, which still remains forbidden under international morality as well as international law, but because the use of military force against an individual was seen as controversial. This was true also, there was a certain kind of embarrassment in the World War II targeting of Admiral Yamamoto's plane, the specific targeting. It was seen to be unseemly by a military to target an individual. Up through, I believe the date was 2006, the United States State Department was writing reports every year condemning Israel's practice of targeted killing in Palestinian territories. What's interesting about that is the Defense Department was meanwhile hiring Israeli military advisors to advise them on how to create a targeted killing program for the U.S. There was at least a division between the State Department and military divisions about really the morality of targeted killing. And so it's controversial. It's an interesting philosophical question. Is there something, again, about the conditions under which we tolerate the kind of killing of war that requires a kind of anonymity, a kind of namelessness? You're a target if you present a threat, but not by virtue of your personal identity. I think the Obama administration really did normalize for Americans the idea that the way military force should be used is with this idea of surgical precision, the identification of a particular individual on the basis of intelligence reports. But that's a new thing in the thinking about war. You might worry about the ethics of that seems to go against the traditions, the principles that have stabilized the use of military violence over the decades. Last one, drone-based killing fails to show respect to victims. I'm actually going to hold this off for now because we're going to pick this up again with the robots. But this the last point, drone-based killing personalizes responsibility, is, I think, one that I want to take up now, and we'll continue on the drones. Remember that picture of the war room, the situation room, of Obama and Clinton and Biden watching the killing of bin Laden. The point of distributing that picture was not just campaign propaganda or future campaign propaganda, although it certainly was that. The point of that picture was to show this is a group of individuals who are taking on this burden, fully absorbed in this burden, this choice, a choice that would have had terrible political repercussions if the raid had gone badly. but to place that responsibility fully on the shoulders of these political officials. On the one hand, you say there's a value to that. It's much better that these officials treat themselves as responsible than treat themselves as not responsible. Yes, but one can wonder whether that personalization of killing removes from citizens the burden of sharing that responsibility. Put citizens in essentially a spectatorial position of cheering the raids that go well, booing at the raids that go badly, but not thinking of this as killings done in their name. That heavily personal investment. Again, this is a hard criticism to make because it's not clear what the alternatives are, but that this heavily personalized form of killing in which executive officials take with pride this mantle of being the one who decides whether this individual lives or dies, whether that's going to have a negative effect on democracy. And that's what I want to go on to in a bit. Okay, let's see. I'm going to skip this for now because we'll come back to that. Yeah, okay, this is, sorry, the personalization response. By the way, if any of you have not seen this movie, the movie came out a year or so ago, Eye in the Sky, about drone-based killing. Helen Mirren as a British officer who's trying to use drones to engage some young men who seem to be preparing for a suicide bombing. It's a terrific movie. It's a little stylized, but it actually, as far as I understand, it captures fairly accurately many of the dynamics of the politics of drone-based killing systems. I'm going to want to give us a little more time for robots. So I'm going to go through these slides kind of quickly. For drone-based killing, there are really what I call two modalities of drone-based killing. There are Pentagon, military-based, Title 10 is the statute that authorizes the use of force, militarized uses of drones. And the second one is the one that we hear about more, what are called the Title 50 operations that go through the CIA. There's a military operator operating the drone in both cases, but the question is where the target selection comes from and how the decision process is made. Most of the White House intensive processes are Title 50 processes. And this is, again, I think, a concern, particularly about citizen responsibility. The Pentagon is us. The Pentagon is essentially a representative system of the armed forces. The armed forces include people drawn disproportionately from rural and poor communities of color, but nonetheless, in a sense, more representative than the CIA, than the kind of highly specialized national security complexes. And the way in which the military engages in deliberative processes, policy processes, is historically one that is more inclusive, broader, open to traditions of vigorous counter-argument than the CIA. This is actually the new National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster. As you probably know, he built his claim to fame on arguing that there is a distinctive military tradition of offering vigorous dissent and vigorous counter-argument. That tradition disappeared for a while during the Vietnam era. And in his view, the military commanders in Vietnam violated the public trust by failing to challenge Lyndon Johnson and his advisors by telling them hard truths they didn't want to hear. But that there is this distinctive tradition within the military. There's a tradition both of service, of recognizing authority and chain of command, but also of registering vigorous dissent. And that tradition does not seem to be as present in the CIA. If you think back to the torture scandals of the United States post 9/11, one thing you may not have noticed is that by and large, actually, the military performed much better. Abu Ghraib was an egregious violation. That was one that was publicized by a military leaker. The heads of service and the chief lawyers from many of the military services were the most prominent people to object to the extreme interrogation torture regime. Although there were certainly people on both sides, by and large, the CIA went along with what were clear violations of domestic and international law much more quickly than the military did. So you may think that there is a responsibility difference to the extent our use of lethal force or of national lethal force is channeled through the CIA channel, the Title 50 channel, as opposed to the military channel. We're going to get, in a sense, worse performance in relation to democratic norms, to statutes, and to principles. Obama had tried to shift the killing operations from the CIA into the military. That attempt foundered, and it's unlikely to be extended by Trump. Okay, let's see. Killer robots, lethal autonomous weapon systems. Here are just some pictures of some different ones. So drones raise a host of questions about insulating a public from responsibility for decisions, the personalization of decision making. These questions are enhanced in a sense by the use of killer robots. The killer robots on the borders are probably the easiest cases. What are being developed now are sort of medium-sized drones. I think that one is a British drone that's about the size of a small fighter, but then there are smaller ones too used for surveillance, bottom left. And then actually what are being developed, especially these are aerial models, are these little micro drones that are currently being developed unarmed, but can very easily be set to have the capacity to fire a single bullet or a small enough explosive charge that will kill one or more targets, but they're deployed in swarms. These new systems, let's see if this works, have capacities that are hard to imagine even a couple of years ago. Is there a sound cable as well? Oh, yeah. With the new systems, the problem of locomotion has essentially been solved. Human locomotion. Problems of vision and identification have essentially been solved. We have software processes are able to recognize, you've seen this in your Google Photos, the ability of Google Photos to identify individuals. Those capacities are a fraction of what some of the new systems can do in identifying targets. This video has a spot, I guess not. Sleep well tonight. So we have systems that, the ground-based systems that are extremely mobile, and flying systems. This was a test of, right again. From a few months ago. Here, I'm going to speed up a little bit because this part's not that interesting. So these two fighters are deploying a payload of these little micro drones about this large. And these are systems that are, they're not being controlled individually, they're controlled through a program that treats them essentially as a school of fish, a swarm. They are given instructions to attack these targets here, and they are self-correcting in their positions and in their coordination with one another. Again, this is all done through autonomous decision making by essentially by the software on these units, this coordination. They're given a general goal and then figure out their means for achieving that goal. what does it mean to say that these are autonomous systems? Well, let's talk a little bit about that. They're autonomous systems. Sometimes the phrase is, are humans in, on, or out of the loop? A human in the loop involves essentially is the sort of the drone situation. A human is operating the device, makes the decision for the device to use lethal force. Is a human on the loop, able to intervene? Let's say the walking robot or the swarm identifies the wrong target. Is a human on the loop and able to monitoring a sense and able to intercede? Typically, especially when multiple systems are deployed, it would be impossible for any human to actually be effectively on the loop to be able to intercede in a meaningful way. They might be able to stop a deployment of robots, but they wouldn't be able to intercede at the individual level. Or finally, are humans out of the loop? That's the goal of the military technology, which is that the human makes the decision to send out the fleet of micro drones, send in the walking combat figure into a house to clear it, and then an autonomous system decides who is friend, who is enemy, how do we engage. And when people are talking about killer robots, when they're talking about autonomous weapon systems, they typically mean a system in which a human makes the decision to send the weapon into the zone of conflict, but then the weapon system makes the decision about whom to kill, what to destroy. The question is, who's responsible when robots kill? How do we think about this question of responsibility? Well, here's some not very philosophical reasons to worry about killer robots. Continuing this theme, one is that they'll achieve strong AI and become our robot overlords. There are people who worry about this, particularly people in the South Bay. I'm not sure you can decide for yourself how realistic it is. Another reason is that people don't kill, robots kill. There's no personal responsibility. When a robot kills, it discharges the debt of responsibility for a death. Not sure that is accurate as a claim. In fact, I'm sure it's not accurate any more than the idea that it's a bomb that kills, not the person that kills. But we might think that that robots will make people impervious to the morality of killing. That if robots are the ones who are closest to the decision to use lethal force, people will not regard themselves, including individual soldiers, won't regard themselves as responsible. That's a concern. Probably the most serious concern, non-philosophical concern about the proliferation of robots, is the risk of proliferation. The micro drones I showed you, the estimates are that they can be developed fairly soon. The lethal armed micro drone at a cost of a couple dollars. ISIS could buy a truckload of them very easily. There are risks of hacking and abuse. That we're in a system right now in which it seems like only the major powers can develop these lethal systems, but that will not last very long. And there will be a massive proliferation of killer robots, particularly the micro robots, unless there is an international treaty to ban their development and the sale of their technology. There are people, including a computer scientist at Berkeley, Stuart Russell, is working very hard on this issue. Governments are not showing a great deal of enthusiasm for this, but that is a very serious reason to be concerned. I'm going to switch now to these philosophical reasons to worry about killer robots. One is that another point in the morality of killing, these are the slides I skipped before, point about the morality of wartime killing is that it requires a relationship of respect. This goes to the idea that part of the ethics of military killing are grounded in a tradition of chivalry, of mutual engagement. Some of this involves a question of risk, but some of it also involves an idea of respect for the victim. And to the extent that we have developed post-World War II, we developed norms against saturation bombing. They were violated again in Vietnam, but those were seen as aberrations from an ethics war that involves treating the enemy combatant as a figure of respect. And many of the laws of armed conflict involve protection of the wounded, prohibitions against torture, sort of the Geneva Convention model of prisoner of war status in general, involve committing a state to a system of respect that has reciprocal benefits, but is also seen as ensuring to some degree this peculiar idea of the morality of war. One of the claims is that there can't be, if a robot is killing, there's no respect, there's a kind of disrespect. I've polled people, I don't fully understand the sensation myself, but there are people who feel like it would not only be a terrible thing to be killed, but a worse thing yet to be killed by a robot, because of the coldness of the robot, because the robot can't see you in its eyes. That there's something especially chilling about the idea of being killed by an automatic force. This is the one I've been hammering in subtly, and actually I think I'll end with this so that we can take some questions. I think the most important philosophical reason is it moves citizens towards non-responsibility. To the extent, again, the first move was launched in the drone process, the personalization of responsibility of the White House and the Situation Room, or the disappearance of it through the intelligence agencies. Shifting war to robots, certainly shifting remote war to robots, increases the ease with which a citizenry contemplates the use of force, tolerates the use of force by its leaders, and it enables us to escape responsibility. And I think that violates really the essential demand of democracy, which is that citizens take responsibility. That citizens take responsibility for the actions done in their name, the actions done by their agents. Here, I'm gonna skip that last one. This is the major theme I want to leave you with. There are lots of practical concerns about the use of robots, use of drones, but the major concern is that it encourages a kind of complacency, that war is a remote process, that war is a process that doesn't engage the citizenry in its task of monitoring, controlling, reacting against its leaders, that it treats killing as something done by something else, someone else, and not as done by us in our names. Okay, for questions, I'd be happy to take them. I know this covered a lot of material. Thank you. Yes?
I'm curious as to, you mentioned that the CIA and the Pentagon
Yes.
have access to the drones that we're using now, but who from these two departments have access to purchase new developing technologies? What authorization do they get on how much to spend? What do they get to?
Who has access to the lethal weapons technology? I mean, the autonomous technology, the robots?
Who has access and who has authorization to purchase new ones?
Well, so authorization goes through a congressional process typically. That process is usually secretive. There's usually what's called black box funding, and not all congressional appropriations for top secret systems are usually shielded from public scrutiny. But it's usually done through the appropriations process. It starts in the House, but it will be done in a secret session, and it's sometimes possible for an enterprising journalist to kind of figure out how much money is appropriated, but very often the information is not public.
So they do not have to disclose the information that they purchase, or they...
It's very hard to get that information. Occasionally you'll see leaks. So in the killer robots issue, I forgot the name of the guy, but one of the people who's sort of high up in procurement in the Defense Department was bragging about the development of what he called the wolf packs of robots. And then he realized that was contrary to other public statements by the military, and sort of he withdrew his statements. But you will sometimes see there's a sort of group within the Pentagon who are particularly excited about this technology, and they'll brag about it. They'll be excited about it. Any other questions, or better go? Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm happy to bring out and answer questions.